What I love about anthropology is being able to bring our whole selves into our research. So I'm Kiara Wickremasinghe. You can tell from my name I'm Sri Lankan by origin. I'm doing a PhD at SOAS University of London. I'm also a researcher with lived experience. But beyond this broad identity of lived experience, I'm also a musician. I'm an opera singer, I'm a violinist, and I'm a composer.
Wow. Musician, anthropologist, mental health practitioner, many things.
Those would be the three main identities. But introducing yourself is an impossible task, isn't it?
Maybe we should start with how we came to work together and how you came to be a PhD researcher in the study on the psychiatric innovation open dialogue that I was involved in, that I set up 4 or 5 years ago now.
So when open dialogue first became a thing in the NHS Trust, where I was at the end of being a service user, I was sort of ready to leave mental health services and forget the whole thing happened. I was so eager to escape. And I remember telling my psychiatrist at my discharge review, I've just survived something monstrous and I now want to go and treat myself. I've got a new fresh dream. I'm going to go and become an opera singer. So it was such a pipe dream, but I basically didn't envisage working in mental health services or doing anything relating to that. And then open dialogue came along and I was really drawn to it. I felt so hopeful. And I think coupled with also knowing that it's pretty hard to escape the ghosts of psychosis, I thought, well, I might as well embrace it then. And I'd never heard of anthropology, really. I mean, I'd heard of it. I didn't know what it was. My background my degrees were in geography and ethnomusicology. But the more I read up on anthropology and this intersection between anthropology and mental health, and meeting you and this opportunity to undertake a PhD, I thought this is really meant to be. And I don't think I've felt surer of anything else in my life. And yeah, I love anthropology now. I feel like I'm never leaving it.
I met you with your care coordinator, came to SOAS, and we had a meeting to talk about the idea of putting together an application for research funding to do a piece of embedded ethnographic research. Now, what was that like for you, and what did the idea of being an embedded anthropologist mean for you, and how did it unfold?
Yeah, I guess firstly, just thinking back to that first time I met you in the presence of my care coordinator, and just again feeling really grateful for having such a great care team and during my time under mental health services, which is a very rare thing, sadly. But just having a care coordinator who, well after my discharge, still held me in mind and very much operated under the principle of recovery being a possibility, and sort of working in a very strengths-based approach and thinking, where could Kiara fit in? And she's got the academic side, and this could be like an interesting new thing for her at a time where I didn't really know where I was going in life. And what I love about anthropology is being able to bring our whole selves into our research.
So would you say, we've got different elements here. We've got anthropology as a way of taking experience of life and bringing that experience of life into an inquiry that's much broader than your own experience and looks outwards to the to the wider world, in this case of mental health care in the UK, but doesn't remove your own experience, but makes your experience part of the capability that you bring, as well as your intellectual capability, as well as your academic background, and all these different elements that are part of what makes you as an anthropologist. Do you see, is that how you see it? Because I see it like these different things that all, it's not like these are, one is more important than the other. They all go together.
Absolutely. And I think, David, the fact that both of us have lived experience around mental health in some way or another brings us, we are kind of at the heart of this research. It's so important to have lived experience when we're doing this kind of work. It brings us closer to epistemic justice when we're telling other people's stories, and our stories are caught up in these stories we're telling as well. Just thinking about the sociologist Arthur Frank and how he talks about serious illness being the loss of a destination, the loss of a map, and how the telling of stories enables us to get out of this sense of narrative wreckage. And as people with lived experience, we are what Arthur Frank would call wounded storytellers.
Right.
We're moral witnesses to both our stories, but also the stories of others. And just thinking about sort of this category of lived experience, and just thinking about what Foucault has said about the category of lived experience, because it's a dividing practice, as he would say. It's simultaneously individualizing and totalizing. It's imposed on us by ourselves and by others, and it's an identity that others recognize in us and we recognize in others. But I sort of believe that it's so important for lived experience researchers to be seen as beyond this label as well. We are more than this one identity. And I've really appreciated that you have seen me as someone beyond this one identity. And, you've been my mic stand at a recent Open Dialogue conference dinner gala, where I
your operatic voice
belted
came
out
in.
some opera. And, you've probably watched so many hours of my singing videos, or, oh, David, here's me doing some stand-up comedy. Do you want to see it? Or, oh, can I kind of present some service user stories, but using a soundscape, by composing a soundscape. And you really allowed me to experiment with and bring in my other identities into this work, but also in terms of having a balanced life. So it's not been just about my PhD. And you're really good, I think, at recognizing that individual students work very differently and in terms of their productivity and creativity. And you've really given me space to just be my complete self. And
well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I think anthropology is a great discipline in that it can allow researchers to find their own form, to find their own way of expressing, way of conducting field work, within a framework that nonetheless can be rigorous and can look for ways of layering and building up complex picture of what's going on. But there's no one way of doing that, and people bring different capacities, and those and a PhD program oughtn't to constrain people to work in a particular kind of way that defines what field work is. Now, what's it been like for you, and what was it like for you to wear those different hats, and maybe other hats too, of being an anthropologist, a practitioner in a community mental health team who were people who you were both studying and you was also part of?
Well, I think this is why my PhD thesis is titled Being Inside and In Between.
Right. Yes.
Because of the multiple hats and identities I was juggling, and that real sense of liminality, but also coming to see it as a real privilege of being able to relate to more people in the field. And after my year of fieldwork, I took up a part-time job as a peer support worker. And this was partly out of curiosity as to, I'd never had a peer support worker. I was really curious about what it would be like to inhabit that role. But also the beauty of anthropology is how inductive it is. You don't go into your research with this set research question or hypothesis, and you can kind of go and see what's emerging as a sort of a theme or a question that you want to follow up on. And for me, the peer-supported open dialogue was very much a theme I wanted to follow up on. And so just the opportunity to be able to occupy multiple roles, and it took me into different settings. It took me into more one-to-one settings with service users, sort of creatively carving out other ways of being alongside people in their recovery journeys, whether that was going to a park, going to a museum, went ice skating with one person. It was just settings outside of the clinic, but also then being able to think about and document how interactions in these contexts outside the clinic then would feed into interactions within open dialogue treatment meetings.
That sort of hanging out that sounds kind of what anthropologists do.
Yeah.
That sort of being with people in a way that's very much informal. It's not a given institutional role. It's just being with people in their everyday activities, which is probably quite recognizable as what anthropologists do. But then you also have a different kind of role, which was being the clinical role in a hospital, in a mental health hospital, as part of that team. And you had the role that people label as peer. And I'm quite curious to know what that means to you, because it's a word that people use a lot. Peer this, peer that. But what does it actually mean to be a peer? And then on top of that, you are, and throughout that, in this case, you were an anthropologist. So what did it mean to bring those different things together? And what did it mean to be an anthropologist in these different roles?
I think it also depends on the phase of research you're in.
Yeah.
And now that I'm in the writing up phase, it feels like the identity of anthropologists is very much at the forefront.
Yes.
Whereas when I was doing field work, actually the identity that was most at the forefront was being a peer, more than being an open dialogue practitioner or being an anthropologist. And that was very much the identity I brought in terms of my interactions with.
You mean being somebody who would share experiences when you say peer, somebody who would refer to your own lived experience of the system in when you were with people? Is that what you mean?
Yes, but I think it's also being able to relate to people in a different way to maybe what's typically expected in institutional or clinical settings. As a professional, because peers are they're the bridge between service users who are also peers and clinicians or the institution. And you're in this in-between role and of advocacy, really. So David, you were asking about how I've cultivated my identity as an anthropologist. And it's quite tempting, isn't it, to just want to be immersed in fieldwork and not want to leave the field because of the wonderful relationships developed, and because we were also doing I'm just thinking of the right word, but sort of life-changing work.
Yeah, meaningful, life-changing. Yeah.
Making a difference on the ground.
All fieldwork, anthropological knowledge is generated through relationships, and it's not separable from those relationships. And I think you developed, in the team that we were part of, we developed very deep and significant relationships. And of course, anthropologists also leave the field, as it were, and move into another community, the community of anthropologists, in that process of writing and engaging intellectually and being part of, in your case, part of a community of PhD researchers at SOAS in the anthropology department. Could you say something about that transition and what it was like to the part of the PhD research experience, which is about relating to others in your cohort and being part of the university, as well as you move from being part of a mental health community, mental health team, then to being part of an anthropology department that is your new community or another community?
I think I also want to say you were right, David, that having the peer support worker role was very important to my research and to my identity. And I loved that experience. But you were also right that until I left that role and stepped out of my field, I couldn't really have developed more as an anthropologist and as a writer in being able to step back and really reflect on what had happened in those last 3 years of being in the field.
I think there's really there's important things to learn from your experience that can contribute to our building our new centre for anthropology and mental health research in action, CAMHRA, because what we really want to do with that centre is to create an environment that's supportive and makes that bridge between lived experience of mental health challenges or distress and research that brings and builds on that lived experience in research to make that bridge more easily crossable, and to create, because anthropology is a discipline that is based on experience, and that to go back to repeat what was saying earlier about the capabilities that you bring, which are both experience-based, intellectual and academic, and things that are about capacities as a researcher in the field, to create ways of building capacities to support that kind of work.
But one thing that would be great about CAMHRA will be, the presence of more anthropologists with lived experience, more anthropologists studying mental health.
What would you say to somebody who was interested in pursuing an anthropology, who maybe like you had lived experience of mental health service use and was maybe a bit apprehensive and uncertain? What would you say to them about the opportunities, maybe about the things to think about?
Oh, do it. Do the PhD. Get on that anthropology train. It'll change your life and it'll change you as a person for the better. And I think what I've really loved about anthropology is that it's completely changed the way I view the world. The way it's attuned me to issues around inclusion, advocacy, justice. And in terms of how I view the world, I can now see things beyond it being a sort of interpersonal relationship or a conflict and traverse into, well, how do these individuals relate to cultures or institutions or the wider systems that they're in? There's so many layers to viewing something, depending on what we foreground and what we background. And the other thing about anthropology is that it gives you the confidence in how to articulate what's happening in the world. It's been life-changing. It's given me such a profound sense of purpose. I've never lost interest in the research I've been doing because it's so personal to me, and I know I'm part of a team with other researchers with lived experience. So the work means a lot to all of us. And just having a balanced life has helped pace myself out through this journey because it is hard work, but I've never regretted a moment of it.